Number 5, all the Rugrats are dead. So when it comes to this fan theory, it turns out all those adorable little ones on Rugrats were nothing more than the projections of a year old's psychological breakdown. Angelica is typically the character we all hated when we were younger, but in retrospect, she clearly has some pretty extreme neglect issues with her parents. Her mom is always on the phone with work, and her relationship with her dad is superficial at best. We all thought Angelica was just moody because of her age and spoiled upbringing, but here it's said that her attitude is actually due to the traumatic events of the Rugrats' deaths. The Rugrats were really a figment of Angelica's demonic and unimaginable imagination. Try saying that 5 times fast. Apparently Chucky died in 1986 along with his mother. That's why Chaz is a nervous wreck all the time. Tommy was born in 1988 but didn't make it past birth, which is why Stu is constantly in the basement making toys for the son who never had a chance to live. The DeVilles terminated a pregnancy in 1990 and Angelica couldn't figure out what the gender should be, so the twins were just sort of gender to be determined. As for all grown up, the teenage Angelica became addicted to various narcotics, which further aggravated her schizophrenia, bringing her back to her childhood and thus her creations she obsessed over. Because of the time lapse between the present and the last time she interacted with her creations, she made them older. Now Angelica was apparently constantly taking hits of so she would never have to live without her creations, who were her only company. In a judgmental world, Angelica's mom actually passed away of a spicy spoon juice overdose in 1982, just after Angelica was born, and Drew in his depression married a gold-digging that Angelica idolized because she fooled herself into thinking it was her real mom, but always had a concept of her mom, Cynthia, and took a Barbie doll and made it after her mom's image, wearing an unwashed orange dress and having, messy hair, which is why she was so attached to it. Later in life, like I said, she followed her mom's footsteps with all those bad things, dying of overdose at age barely teens when All Grown Up was cancelled. The only Rugrat to not be fictional, however, was Dill. However, Angelica didn't know the difference between Dill and her creations, although Dill didn't follow her commands. After endless crying and a refusal to disappear like the others did when Angelica was angry with them, she took out her anger on him. And due to this, he sustained a brain hemorrhage, which resulted in a deformation, and as he grew up, his damage only became more evident, and by the time he was, made it to all grown up age, he lived as an outcast, being ridiculed for his weirdness. The immense guilt over this is what led Angelica to her, no snow and spicy spoon juice use, and uncreate the Rugrats briefly, until her experiences with hallucinogenics. On a pair-ship to find love, Chaz married a woman named Kira. He was actually going to marry a different woman named Coco, but she just wanted him for his money, who had a daughter named Kimmy that was torn from her because she was a no-snow addict. Now, Angelica imagined her from Kira's stories. Chaz lost his mind after the death of his wife and was in denial that she was ever a woman of the night. So upon to America, Chaz and Kira married, and she got her green card. It was actually a really happy and romantic story. Kira sadly continually struggled with addiction, but was apparently relatively happy with her life in Chaz. Susie was Angelica's only real friend, who entertained the thought of Angelica's creations, for, her sake. Angelica spent the last days of her life in the back of the school cafeteria, imagining friends around her and playing with the lives of her creations. Yeah, my brain hurts. Why did she imagine, little ones and not folks her own age? Well, since her relationship is mostly non-existent with her parents, the only time they show any kind of emotion towards her is when they're disciplining her, which to a neglected little one comes off as cruelty. She imagines them as, young, because she needs someone she can be an authority figure with, because that's the only relationship that Angelica understands. Yeah, my brain's spinning. Number 4, Ed, and Eddy all live in purgatory. These theories really have a way of turning innocent shows into eerie mysteries. Some theorists propose that these 3 misfits are stuck in purgatory. It's a haunting concept, suggesting that their afterlife is intertwined with their traumatic pasts. Rolf, the first to arrive in this eerie realm, brought his farm life with him, choosing to neglect the cattle to play with the other lost souls. Then there's Johnny, who befriended Rolf, and even in death, he's joined by his imaginary friend Plank as they wander aimlessly through the afterlife. Eddy, the schemer from New York, met his end when a swindling attempt went awry, drowning in the river, and even now he's still chasing the almighty dollar. The brother and sister, Sarah and Ed, came next, both escaping the chaos of World War II in their unique ways, but a car wreck in 1953 ended their lives. Naz, the flower power human of the late 60s, met a gruesome end at the hands of a serial ender. Trauma caused her to shut out family in the afterlife, giving her more time to party and flirt. Ed, the intellectual with controlling parents, met his demise in a fiery explosion caused by a Bunsen burner. Kevin, the angry and cynical boy from a broken home, was sadly physically punished to death by his very bad father, and in the afterlife he changed his perception of his father but continued his bullying ways. Jimmy, the sickly, little one, died of leukemia, isolated in his room, neglected by the outside world. And then there are the Canker sisters, sent from hell to torment the neighborhood. Their demonic origins grant them supernatural abilities, making them feared by everyone, including the Eds. Hey, this purgatory theory adds quite the sinister layer to the quirky world of Ed, and Eddy, wouldn't you think? Number 3, Garfield is hallucinating. Oh, okay. Garfield is one of my favorite comic strips of all time, but in the fall of 1989, Jim Davis produced a series of Halloween-based strips about Garfield waking up to an abandoned house. When Garfield finally accepted that he was alone, he suddenly brought back to his owner John's house. Naturally, the storyline had several readers question the meaning behind these series of strips, and because of these strips' surreality regarding the Halloween story arc, it is commonly believed that Garfield had either died or that he's slowly starving to death, and that the entire strip is his dying dream. Look, this theory does make sense in some places. Throughout the strip, Garfield would often have dreams regarding food and would constantly beg John for his trademark dish, lasagna. So if Garfield's always begging for food and just wants to sleep, oh dear. Number 2, Ash Ketchum has been in a coma since the first episode. So Pokémon is still airing new episodes all the time and follows the adventures of, Ash Ketchum and Pikachu! I don't know a lot about Pokémon, so we're gonna try our best here. Despite over 20 years though of adventures, Ash never really gets much older, and he somehow keeps discovering more and more and more new Pokémon that the world didn't know about in earlier seasons. And that's because those new Pokémon at the time didn't exist. This theory even explains some of the peculiarities of the Pokémon world, such as the consistent presence of certain characters like Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny. So for example, in the very first episode, Ash and Pikachu are attacked by a flock of Spearows in a thunderstorm when, Pikachu blasts everything in the area with a massive jolt of electricity, with Ash at ground zero of said attack. But then he walks off into the sunset like he didn't just sustain a, near lethal electrocution. Or so we all thought apparently. The analysis of Ash's companions and rivals as aspects of himself is a unique interpretation. From Brock representing his repressed sexuality to Gary Oak as a wish fulfillment figure, it offers a fresh perspective on the relationships and character dynamics within the series. The theory also delves into the symbolism of the Pokémons themselves, with each of Ash's Pokémons representing different aspects of his personality and struggles. It's an intriguing way to look at the creatures he befriends and, trains on his journey. Not only are Ash's Pokémon a manifestation of different parts of himself, the Pokémon of other trainers are as well. Koffing and Ekans were symbolic of Team Rocket's willingness to change, hence their evolutions. Once his mind was able to overcome that roadblock and allow them to change once, it gave him the chance to truly change. An interesting note is that Piputar is a rationalization, a Pokémon's rival caught before they met. Even Ash would become suspicious if everyone he met had no carryover Pokémon from previous places he had been to. Now, other trainers are more direct forms of his issues, ones he must either come to terms with or outright suppress. Gym leaders are more primary aspects of his personality, with each Pokémon being stronger than the last to display a level of skill he could only be capable of if he gave into it. In effect, every time he is doing battle with a part of him that he would rather not have in control. Originally, Ash had the battles, which evolved into team battles and contests, and the explanation for this is that his issues became more and more complicated, and the means of dealing with them needed to become more complex as well. The fact that he uses issues he has already dominated to win is a sign he's growing stronger. Ash releases his Pokémon because his mind is forcing him to, let go of them. The second he raises an overpowered team, a tournament comes up, and after fighting his way through it, he has to go to a new land for new challenges. However, with an overpowered team, there won't be any challenges or any way to motivate him further. The Ash that wants to stay in the coma and keep journeying hands his solved issues over to Professor Oak so he can continue and overcome the unresolved ones, which is, essentially his mind forcing him to deal with his issues. Ash's rivals and the Elite Four are ultimately the strongest part of this cycle. Having Pokémon that are essentially godlike, they represent both what can be attained and what is unattainable. Ash's rivals are all possible futures he envisions for himself, because they're all older than him. The theory's conclusion, where Ash awakens from his coma, either to face a world that has moved on without him or to continue his journey with a newfound determination, is kind of a poignant and thought-provoking scenario. It leaves us with the idea that sometimes our dreams and desires can become a powerful driving force in our lives. In the end, this theory kind of provides a unique and complex interpretation of the Pokémon series, turning it into a tale of self-discovery and growth within the confines of a dream world. Honestly, that kind of checks. Number 1, cars overthrew mankind. It's not often that crazy fan theories are confirmed by higher-ups that are actually involved with the franchise. No matter how sound a conspiracy may be, it's often left up to fans to decide for themselves without any real answers. But in the case of the Cars movie and franchise, a disturbing theory was actually confirmed by the creative director himself, Jay Ward. So the theory goes that in the universe of Cars, we don't see humans because they simply don't exist anymore. When the Cars became sentient beings, they realized there was no need for humans and they them all. And to add insult to injury, Ward confirmed that the cars in fact take on the personality of the last person who drove them. So this seems to imply that the cars somehow literally consumed all of the people in the world and took on their personalities. So would this make them soul-sucking cars? Well, it doesn't get much worse than that. Hi, iRobot. You're looking pretty familiar right now. Also, when it comes to overall Disney curse things, does anybody remember the fly from The Emperor's New Groove? Just a little sidebar here. The fly that gets killed by the spider while screaming, "Help me, help me"? Okay, well, did anybody notice how the only animals that can talk in the movie are the ones that were once human? That means that the spider ate a human. All the more reason not to like the little creeps. So the Walt Disney Company has been known to reuse the odd idea or two. Being resurrected from the dead via acts of true love is just one of them. But have you ever been watching a Disney movie and had a bit of déjà vu? Not just that, oh, this movie has that familiar Disney look and feel sort of thing, but more like, I swear I've literally seen this exact scene before in another movie? Well, it turns out it's not just plot lines Disney has recycled, but actual animation as well. And the evidence is there in plain sight, but you gotta ask, like, why? So, there's some rumors here. Let's go through them and then we'll go through the truth. One big rumor goes that in the 1970s, when Disney movies like Robin Hood came out, the studio was broke, and recycling old animation was a cheap way to make ends meet. So during the phony King of England, some of Maid Marian's dance moves are rotoscoped from those of Snow White, and also Duchess. Maid Marian's design was eventually reused for that of Vixie's from The Fox and the Hound, although Vixie is less anthropomorphic and more realistic looking. However, while that would have certainly saved some time from designing and planning new movement sequences, it isn't the whole truth. According to Floyd Norman, a Disney animator, the director of Robin Hood and Winnie the Pooh, Wolfgang Reitherman, wanted to play it safe by using animation he knew worked. Look, at the end of the day, after Walt passed away in 1966, the studio lost its guiding star, and Disney's profits from their animation features went down. So what Wolfgang was doing was perhaps an attempt to recapture some of the Walt Disney magic by sticking with the old charm. And then we got all those films from that period that featured direct copies of the studio's older animations just rotoscoped. It's kind of like some of the nostalgia baiting unnecessary sequels we see today. But these movies were like, okay, original movie, just we're gonna take what we like. Alright, here's the reality. Disney's been recycling its animation for various movie scenes since it created Dumbo in 1941. According to Floyd, Walt Disney himself probably never even knew or noticed that animators were recycling scenes. He was focused more on the big picture. And while he was concerned with details, this was something he was like, it works. At the end of the day, animators are magicians. Whatever tools they use to make the magic happen, so be it. You're doing amazing, folks. If you want to talk about movie Easter eggs, A113 is perhaps one of the greatest and most elusive ones there is. If you look closely enough, in almost every single Pixar feature, you'll find that silly little code concealed in the depths of CGI. But what exactly does it mean? So the answer takes us back all the way to Pixar's origins. The spirit of Pixar was cultivated by names such as John Lasseter, Pete Docter, Andrew Stanton, and Brad Bird. Those folks are all alumni of the prestigious California Institute of Arts. And what's more, they and many other future Pixar animators all learned their craft in the same classroom, A113. It was apparently a dingy and cramped room, mind you, but nevertheless, it was a place where Pixar would essentially be born. And it's thought that Brad Bird began the fun tradition of hiding A113 in Disney films, starting with The Brave Little Toaster. The tradition continued with the development of Pixar, appearing in the studio's first feature, Toy Story. Now, if you're more of an audio Easter egg person, the incredible John Ratzenberger has a voice role in almost every single Pixar movie ever made. Sometimes it's a main part that's easy to find, such as Ham in Toy Story, but other times it's a little more tricky to suss it out. And he's not the only one. Alan Tudyk is another Disney voice Easter egg. He's done a lot of super fun voices over the years. We all love Hey Hey, right? And finally for today, by their very nature, cartoons aren't exactly intended to be realistic. Okay, how many grand pianos have you been crushed by lately? But besides all that fun stuff, there's something distinctly unrealistic about classic cartoons. Their fingers. Just take notice of your favorite cartoon characters. Chances are they only have 4 digits. And that's because around the early 20th century, when animation was still new, it was super expensive. In fact, adjusted for inflation, Disney's 1928 7-minute short, Steamboat Willie, cost over $87,000. Granted, Pixar movies nowadays cost as much as $100,000 per minute of animation, but those modern flicks are a lot more complex. And Disney has a ton more resources available now than it did way back when. Back then, Disney animators had to be kinda thrifty. They realized that drawing just one less finger saved a ton of time, which in turn saved heaps and heaps of money. The cost effectiveness is only just part of the reason why classic cartoons look like cartoons. Realism was just too much, and it was too expensive. Characters were aesthetically simplified. Even in more recent times, animators have created similar shortcuts, such as Ursula the Octopus having only 6 tentacles instead of 8. Intriguingly, given that cartoon fingers need to be large enough to see individually, animators have also concluded that 5 fingers just don't look right. Walt Disney even said himself that if Mickey Mouse had 5 fingers, his hands would look like bunches of bananas, and nobody wants that. Also, speaking of Mickey's hands, what's the deal with those gloves? What's he hiding? While it's possible that Mickey's fingers might look all kinds of weird under those gloves, There are indeed a few key official reasons why classic cartoon characters like Mickey wear those white gloves. Similar to the four-finger situation, drawing gloves was quicker and easier, which cuts down money. Also, hands present a lot of time-consuming challenges. You got those joints, you got the nails. Whereas gloves, easy peasy, you don't have to worry about the little details. It also had to do with color back in the day. Color TVs weren't mainstream until the 1960s, so characters like Mickey Mouse began in black and white. So for Mickey, having a mostly black body, it made sense for him to have contrasting white hands, so then they didn't get lost. Fun fact, in Steamboat Willie, he didn't have gloves yet. In addition to that, Walt also revealed in his 1957 biography that the gloves were intended to make him look a little more human.
Coming in at number 3, we have Tales from the Crypt Keeper. Tales from the Crypt Keeper is an animated TV series which aired on YTV in Canada back in the 90s, and was based on the 1950s EC comic series Tales from the Crypt, as well as the live-action TV series of the same name. However, Tales from the Crypt Keeper was certainly milder, with it being made for children. However, saying that, it still managed to pack a punch and a lot of scares. The series details the Crypt Keeper telling different horror stories to the viewers, each with a lesson to be learned. Very educational. However, the episodes are genuinely twisted, with some of them being truly terrifying. For example, the episode Gorilla's Paw is essentially a retelling of W.W. Jacobs' The Monkey's Paw, which follows an unpopular kid who steals a gorilla's paw in order to be a part of a secret club, but he quickly discovers that the paw can grant wishes with twisted results. Or more terrifying still, the Haunted Mine episode, which follows a boy who visits his aunt, during which time he finds himself stuck inside of an abandoned mine, filled with unusual shapes and dark secrets. Spooky stuff. Coming in at number 2, Real Monsters. One of my favourite shows growing up, which says a lot. Real Monsters is a cartoon which aired on Nickelodeon and focused on 3 young monsters. Ikis, Ablina and Crumb, who attend a school for monsters under a city dump and learn to frighten humans. The show still haunts me to this day, with it including some of the scariest monsters I've ever seen. That's a bit of a stretch, but I mean it. For example, Massage Monster, who looked like this, or the Library Monster, who looked like this. Lovely stuff and definitely child friendly. The show is garish but blissfully silly, with wildly perverse humour that many children would certainly not understand, nor should they. There is also Grumble, a tall green-blue monster with 2 tufts of hair, a beard and a tail, and wears a belt and a red pump on each of his 4 feet. Grumble's assistant is Zimbo, voiced by Tim Curry, a horror icon, who resembles a bee with 1 mammalian leg and a humanoid face with green hair, all sounding pretty frightening to a small child, right? Honestly, I still think about the show and how it affected my life. I think it really made me who I am as a person, which is royally in the head. I kind of love that though. And finally, coming in at number 1, Courage the Cowardly Dog. Courage the Cowardly Dog is an animated horror comedy series that aired on the Cartoon Network back in the late 90s/early 2000s. Now, the show follows the title character, a pink anthropomorphic dog who lives with an elderly couple in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. For the most part, in each episode, the trio are thrown into bizarre and disturbing misadventures, which tend to involve the paranormal and supernatural. However, for a show that is aimed towards children, it certainly had a fascination with dark, surreal humour and horror atmosphere. Now, the show successfully embraced all manner of horror, creating a show that lingered in the minds of many children for years. Some of the particularly chilling episodes included King Ramses' Curse, as well as the House of Discontent, the latter following the trio being plagued by poltergeists that need them to grow crops, otherwise they'll be forced to leave the farm. The series even dedicates a few episodes to classic horror movies which children would of course know nothing about, at the time anyway. For example, the episode Demon in the Mattress featured Muriel being possessed by a demonic mattress, a clear homage to The Exorcist, film certainly not made for children. Even now as an adult, it's hard not to feel an overwhelming sense of discomfort when watching Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Okie dokie, time to move on to a show that's a little less dark as a whole, the classic Dudley Do-Right show. Dudley Do-Right is a fictional character who originally appeared as the main protagonist of Dudley Do-Right of the Mounties. He's a dim-witted but conscientious and cheerful Canadian Mountie who works for Inspector Fenwick. Do-Right is always trying to catch his nemesis, Snidely Whiplash, and rescue Inspector Fenwick's daughter, damsel in distress Nell Fenwick, with whom Do-Right is deeply infatuated. He usually succeeds only by pure luck or through the actions of his horse, aptly named Horse. So, in theory, a himbo. How in tarnation did an episode of a wholesome show like this get the boot? Never mind, only the second episode of the first season? Alright, well let's discuss the episode, Stokey the Bear. When the lumberjacks working on Mount Up prepare to go to work, they are surprised to see the entire forest go up in flames. Not only that, the lumber camp and everything was on fire. It seems that Stokey, who used to lead the fight against forest fires, was now under the hypnotic influence of Snidely Whiplash, and was now leading the fight for forest fires. Constable Dudley Do-Right soon picks up Stokey's trail and follows him into Quebec, and into a firehouse. When the fire bell rings, the firemen rush out, only to find that it was actually their firehouse that was on fire. So while the men are fighting the fire, Do-Right spots Stokey just roasting marshmallows and pursues him onto the roof of the building. By now the building is burning out of control, but Dudley rushes in to rescue the bear. Having pleaded Stokey's case, Do-Right takes Stokey for a change of scenery to Chicago. There, Stokey starts a major fire, and Do-Right convinces somebody else to blame it on their cow. Stokey the Bear was an obvious parody of the popular Smokey the Bear, who was the mascot for the US Forest Service. They took a little bit of an issue with their main guy being shown lighting fires and not really giving a damn. Also, the closing references to a fire in Chicago suggest that it was actually Stokey that started the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. So I think this next example is the only episode of something I'll talk about today that was banned for genuinely being unsafe, and not just dark in context. So youngins from the 90s, this is a question for you. Do you remember hearing about a killer Pokémon episode? I wasn't familiar with the game or the show at the time, so I can't confirm or deny the rumors on my own, so let me know in the comments. I need y'all's help. So while the rumors were greatly exaggerated, there was some truth to them. In Season 1, Episode 28, titled Electric Soldier Porygon, Ash and his friends find that there is something wrong with the Pokeball's transmitting device at the local Pokemon Center. To find out what's wrong, they've got to go inside the machine. 20 minutes into the episode, Pikachu stops missiles with his Thunderbolt attack, resulting in an explosion that flashes red and blue lights. Although there were similar parts in the episode also with similar flashes, two anime techniques called Paka Paka and Flash made this scene particularly intense. These flashes were bright strobe lights, blinks at a rate of about 12 Hz for approximately 6 seconds. So at this point, some of the viewers experienced blurred vision, headaches, dizziness, and nausea. Others suffered from seizures, blindness, convulsions, and unconsciousness. Japan's Fire Defense Agency reported that 685 viewers, roughly 310 boys, 375 girls, were taken to hospitals by ambulances. Although many victims recovered during the ambulance trip, more than 150 were admitted to hospitals, and I think 2 were hospitalized for at least 2 weeks or more. Thankfully, nobody actually passed away, but out of an abundance of caution, the episode was never shown on television ever again. Actually, after this incident, the show went into a 4-month hiatus to be like, okay, we gotta reevaluate. Next up is a show I can't say I've ever watched myself, the Ren and Stimpy show. It often pushed the envelope of good taste, but one episode crossed the line to the point where Nickelodeon was like, we're not airing this. The series follows the misadventures of Ren, an emotionally unstable and psychopathic Chihuahua dog, and Stimpy, a good-natured and dim-witted Manx cat. The show generated significant controversy for its dark humor, innuendos, adult humor, violence, and shock value. All of the controversy contributed to the production staff's altercations with Nickelodeon's Standards and Practices Department. Some segments of the show were altered to exclude references to religion, politics, booze, violence, and tobacco. The episode Powdered Toast Man had a cross removed from the Pope's hat, and the credit was changed to The Man with the Pointy Hat. The same episode had a segment featuring the burning of the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights that was removed, while in a different episode, Dog Show, the last name of the character, George Liquor, was removed, being changed to George American. And a lot of other episodes included somebody smoking a cigar, pipe, or cigarette. Several episodes had violent, gruesome, or suggestive scenes shortened or removed, including a sequence involving a severed head, a close-up of Ren's face being grated against a man's stubble, etc., etc., etc. The episode that was never supposed to make it to air was titled Man's Best Friend, and it was deemed too controversial because of a scene where Ren harms George Liquor with an oar. Coupled with references to tobacco, as well as some boundary-pushing toilet humor, Nickelodeon was like, nope. The controversial creator of the show was actually fired after submitting the episode, not directly because of it, but this was the final straw. So years later on Spike TV, the show's revival, Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon, debuted with this banned episode as their unofficial pilot. Alrighty folks, we're ending today with an obvious title, South Park. Look, I'll be honest with you, I've never personally been a fan of this show, not my cup of tea, so make of that what you will. The series revolves around 4 boys, Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, Eric Cartman, and Kenny McCormick, and their exploits in and around the titular Colorado town. South Park also features many recurring characters, and the series became infamous for its profanity and dark surreal humor that satirizes a large range of subject matter. The pilot episode was produced using cutout animation. The remainder of the series uses computer animation recalling the prior technique. Since the 4th season, episodes are generally written and produced during the week preceding its broadcast. South Park has always attracted controversy. The massively popular adult cartoon has pushed the boundaries of good taste and decency ever since its initial premiere in 1997. Yeah, the damn thing is as old as I am, so I've never known a world without it. Which hey, a lot of that is why it's so popular. But there are 2 episodes in particular that were simply too much and resulted in some very real and scary problems. The 2 episodes in question, simply titled 200 and 201, featured offensive jokes at the expense of the Prophet Muhammad. Trey Parker and Matt Stone spent much of the episode 200 teasing the appearance of Muhammad, which in the Muslim religion is a massive, blasphemous no-no. When episode 201 aired, it was heavily edited to hide Muhammad's appearance to tamper any potential outrage. Nevertheless, the creators of the show received numerous death threats, and the vocal outrage was insane. 3 weeks after the initial airing of the episodes, a car explosion attempt was foiled in Times Square. Now, while there were no concrete connections between the attempted explosion and the South Park episodes, it was certainly speculated. In turn, the episodes were removed from air and later banned across all streaming platforms.
Coming in at number 3, Snow White. Let's keep going with these classics, shall we? Released in 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Snow White, a princess, is exiled by her stepmother, an evil queen who wants to kill her. So she runs into a forest and is eventually rescued by 7 dwarfs who form a friendship with her. However, it turns out Walt Disney left out some rather gruesome details in the animated movie. The movie is of course based on the original story by German brothers Grimm, and the story is a lot more grim indeed. Despite the book's title, it was actually never intended for children, with the original text including violence, incest, and lots of sex. Now in the original text, which was actually called Little Snow White, the evil queen asks a hunter to take Snow White into the forest to kill her. However, in the original version she was just 7 years old at the time. In the Grimm version, the queen orders the huntsman to bring back Snow White's internal organs, saying, "Kill her, and as proof that she is dead, bring her lungs and liver back to me." So instead he kills a boar and brings back to the queen the boar's lungs and liver, which the queen thinks belongs to Snow White and then eats them. I quote, "The cook had to boil them with salt and the wicked woman ate them, supposing that she had eaten Snow White's lungs and liver." Now to make matters worse, Snow White is also already dead by the time the prince finds her, but he falls in love with her anyways, and as he carts her coffin away to do God knows what with it, the piece of poisonous apple falls out of her throat and she awakens, and as a punishment for her deeds, the evil queen is forced to wear a pair of glowing hot iron shoes placed before her with tongs and dance in them until she drops dead. Lovely stuff. Coming in at number 2, The Little Mermaid. Released in 1989, The Little Mermaid tells the story of Ariel, a young princess who makes a deal with a sea witch, allowing her to meet Eric, the human prince she loves. However, in the original version by Hans Christian Andersen, things aren't quite as cheery. Though the deal with the sea witch does still occur, the penalty for failure isn't just turning back into a mermaid. Instead, it's death. Isn't it always? Yeah, not so kid friendly now, is it? Every step Ariel takes makes her feel like she's walking on daggers, but she still dances for the prince and soon becomes his companion. However, there is no happily ever after because the prince ends up marrying another girl who he mistakenly believes was the one to save him from the shipwreck. Before the mermaid faces death, her sisters sell their hair to bring her a dagger. If she kills the prince, his dripping blood will cause her feet to become fins again. However, in the end she can't do it, and so she jumps off the ship where the wedding was held and ends up turning into sea foam. Disturbing as hell, I know. And finally, coming in at number 1, Sleeping Beauty. We all know the story of Sleeping Beauty. A young princess is cursed to sleep until her true love wakes her with a kiss. Now the Disney movie itself is pretty dark. There are spindles and even an evil witch who can turn into a dragon. However, the original story is very different and far more horrific. The original story was written by an Italian author named Giambattista Basile, who published a book called The Tale of Tales in 1634. It contained 50 different stories, including an early version of Rapunzel, Cinderella, Snow White, as well as Sleeping Beauty, which was actually called Sun, Moon and Talia. Now, as we know, in the Disney version, Princess Aurora is swept off her feet by the prince. However, in the original story, the princess is not swept off her feet, she's actually raped in her sleep. The two main characters don't even meet until Sleeping Beauty is already asleep. Crazy, I know. In the original version, a king finds an abandoned palace. He then sneaks through the window using a ladder and searches every room until he finds Sleeping Beauty, named Talia, who is lying on a bed, deeply sleeping. I quote, "Crying aloud, the king beheld her charms and felt his blood course hotly through his veins. He lifted her in his arms and carried her to bed, where he gathered the first fruits of love, aka he raped her." Hold on though, it gets worse. After he does this, the king goes home and thought nothing of it. Sleeping Beauty wakes up when the fairies place the twins on the sleeping woman's breast so they can nurse. Yeah, she gave birth to the king's twins while she was asleep. Now in the Disney version, Maleficent is the self-proclaimed mistress of evil and curses baby Aurora with the threat of a spindle. However, in the original story, she is the king's wife, a woman married to a cheating rapist. And after she finds out he cheated, she turns vicious and threatens a secretary to reveal the secret of the king's mistress, warning him, "If you hide the truth from me, you will never be found again, dead or alive." He of course tells the queen everything, and in turn the queen tricks Sleeping Beauty into sending her children to the queen. And this is where gets really dark. The queen then orders the cook to slaughter the children and cook them up in several tasty dishes for her wretched husband. The cook couldn't go through with it though, so she instead hides the twins and cooks lamb in their place. Let's skip over the end. The queen is eventually thrown into a fire by the king and Sleeping Beauty are finally reunited with no harm to their children. They get married and live happily ever after. Dumb.
Considering Angela Anaconda never shoved its Canadianness in your face the same way shows like Yvonne of the Yukon and Being Ian would, you'd be forgiven for thinking it was an American production. But the animated monstrosity of Sue Rose and Joanna Ferrone had one trait unique to Canadian media: a bizarrely unique art style that was equal parts stunning and horrifying. This series was actually quite popular around the turn of the century, with 65 episodes made and broadcasted in 35 countries around the world. It even had a super weird short before Digimon the movie, where all of the residents from Angela's town lined up to watch the movie. So this show chronicles the life and times of an imaginative girl and her adventures in and outside of elementary school. It was a show about friendship, creativity, and finding the bright side of life whenever Angela's rival Nanette would rain on her parade in broken French. Angela is most often joined by her best friends Gina Lash, Johnny Stereotype, and more. And the show was surprisingly quite violent. In each episode, the story arc is interrupted with a dream sequence in which Angela conjures imaginative and often gory ways to get rid of her nemesis. She imagines her getting injured in an ice skating trick gone wrong, fed to piranhas, and other things I can't even repeat. Decode Entertainment used black and white photos of actual real-life faces and blended them with cartoon bodies to create this whole show. It was almost like those paper dolls where you cut and paste outfits onto a cartoon's body, but it was only creepier. The 2D arts and crafts style was actually achieved through a state-of-the-art 3D program. As for why everybody looked black and white and gray when the rest of the world was in color, I don't have answers. Grizzly Tales for Gruesome Folks was an animated horror show with a claymation intro and numerous cautionary tales where folks would receive extremely ruthless comeuppances for flaws of heavily varying seriousnesses. This show originated in the UK but was broadcast worldwide, and the episodes were adapted from a book series of the same name by Jamie Ricks. So each episode had a framing device set in an old movie theater named the Squeam Screen, with its creepy caretaker and his spider companion Spindleshanks. The adapted stories are short movies on film reels that the caretaker screens from the projector into the theater, after he finishes talking to the audience about morals and proverbs that are later going to relate to the episode. Speaking of which, in one awful episode called The Barber of Civil, there's a hairdresser who chopped off the tongues of folks who were being rude and foul-mouthed. And if that doesn't sound terrifying, it was weird to watch. Another highlight, a boy who tormented spiders, and in retaliation, they entered his body and spun webs along his ribs. Yeah, we're moving on before I start jumping from fear. And finally for today, we've got Numberjacks. This was a British animated series that focused on math. About 67 episodes were produced. So the Numberjacks are a group of anthropomorphic numbers who team up on a mission. You've got Turquoise 5, Yellow 6, Dark Blue 4, and Pink 3. They go about their everyday lives inside their sofa until they get a call from real-life agents who report problems that need solving. So then you get one or two of the Numberjacks who fly out on location to investigate. They have to work out how to put things right and thwart the dastardly intentions of the 5 meanies. So while the Numberjacks characters are kind of off-putting on their own, there's one meanie who takes the cake for most terrifying. Yes, he's live action, but I think we can make an exception. The Number Taker is male, the largest meanie, and always silent. He causes trouble by taking numbers and numbers of things, and the sleeves of his long white coat hide various attachments. We're talking vacuum cleaner, a magnet, a net, a hook, and a number sucker upper. Also, just look at him. He's freaky even for grown-ups. He's played by the same actor who was a White Walker in Game of Thrones for crying out loud. Into my nightmares goes this show.